And welcome to episode 485 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Michael O'Malley.
Nadine Smith.
And today we're kicking off our M. Night Shyamalan series, going through the filmography. But we're going to kick it off with probably the one that most people know, and that's 1999's The Sixth Sense.
How about that twist?
Can you believe it? To be honest, we can save this for the second part. I halfway through forgot about the whole twist, and then I was just like, "Wait, isn't he dead?" And then I was like, "Oh, it happens." I was like, "Oh, that's right." It wasn't scary. It was more just like, "Oh, I forgot about that. That's fun." It's a good time.
It is fun.
It's nice to have poor memories sometimes because then it just like gives you a whole new experience with the movie.
Yeah, my grandfather he was the kind of person who would do clip outs of newspaper comics on his refrigerator, and he always had one about how, I don't remember what comic this was, but the benefit of getting older is that there's no such thing as a rerun anymore. So
Go.
No such thing as having the twist spoiled anymore.
That sounds pleasant.
Nice.
All right, well let's jump into movies that we saw this week. And really there's only one important movie that we saw that we need to talk about, and that's Megalopolis, which is 20 plus years in the making. Francis Ford Coppola's mea culpa, for if you will. That stars Adam Driver, Giancarlo Esposito, Natalie Emmanuel, Aubrey Plaza, Shia LaBeouf, John Voight, Lawrence Fishburne, Talia Shire, Jason Schwartzman, briefly, Dustin Hoffman coming out of whatever he's been in.
Canceled land.
Is Dustin Hoffman canceled? Is he one of the canceled guys?
He had some sexual assault allegations that came out during Me Too. So
I'm sure Francis Ford was happy to cast him, as he's made abundantly clear.
Francis Ford heard that, was like, "Do I got a part for you?"
God.
So to like kind of, I guess, try to. I mean, it's pretty straightforward what this movie's about, but you have this genius artist architect named Caesar Catalina, played by Adam Driver. And he's as this log line on Letterboxd says, he seeks to leap the city of New Rome into a utopian, idealistic future.
Can someone do that? Can someone leap a thing? Like, isn't leaping something that you do? How is he leaping a city?
Well, he tries to leap at the beginning of the movie, and then he stops time, and he can't. So he's got to leap the whole city.
Spider-Man, when he's like figuring out how to cast the web, and he's like, Shazam, like Cowabunga. It's like, I really wanted the origin story of how he figured out how to say that he needed to just say time stop. You know, it's like
bit by a radioactive stopwatch.
There's no password. It's just like time stop.
Yeah, that's one important facet to this, is that he's this genius architect who also has the supernatural ability of stopping time whenever he wants.
And maybe his wife died.
Possibly.
Has something to do with that.
He inherited it when his wife died.
It's like Inception.
Yeah, but his rival is Mayor Cicero, who remains committed to a regressive status quo, perpetuating greed, special interest, and partisan warfare. Torn between them is socialite Julia Cicero, the mayor's daughter, whose love for Caesar has divided her loyalties, forcing her to discover what she truly believes humanity deserves.
It's a tough decision on her part.
It's a hell of a decision.
Should she go back to the club? Or should she change the world?
Oh my god. I sent let me see if I can pull it up real quick. I saw this meme that was circulating on Twitter that also features a great part from the In the Club sequence, which is where'd it go?
Incredible line reading by Adam Driver too.
You think following me on Letterboxd entitles you to plow through the richness of my Emersonian mind? Yeah, honestly, Adam Driver's like going for it. Like, I respect it. Like, he's at all
literally
times
everyone is going for it in this
everybody's going for it. Honestly,
really
everybody's great.
It's hard for me sometimes to separate Adam Driver from Adam, his character in Girls, but like, and there's a whole arc, you know, where like he becomes an actor in the show, and I just really feel like Adam from Girls would have been in this movie. Like, it just, it would have been. It also like feels like it would have been a season arc on Entourage. Like,
oh, 100%.
Vinny Chase gets cast in Francis Ford Coppola's wacky vanity project. He's like, come on, E, we get to like drink get the free wine, you know, let's do it.
And Francis Ford Coppola like is doing extended cameos on the Entourage season.
It's Francis Ford Coppola's Medellin, you know, for the real Entourage heads.
Yeah. Yeah, so what did y'all make of Megalopolis? Because
I want to hear from Nadine, noted late style Francis Ford Coppola late career apologist.
I'm a big Coppola stan. Youth Without Youth, I believe, was on my Sight and Sound ballot a couple years ago. You know, he is a figure who has fascinated me for my entire kind of cinephile career. Because really, like, one of my big gateways into movies was Star Wars, and then sort of one of my big gateways into like film history was like reading about the production of Star Wars and George Lucas, which, you know, very quickly led to Coppola. And I was
he
just
gets a special thanks for Megalopolis. I don't
know there's a lot of filmmakers who do. I was having kind of fun reading all of them in the theater. But so, and Lucas and Coppola together, their kind of relationship, but also they're just like fierce independence or quest for independence to kind of the point of folly, where in the case of Lucas, he did secure like his financial independence from Hollywood. You know, much like Megalopolis, the prequels were like pretty much totally self-funded. You know, they were distributed by 20th Century Fox, like Megalopolis is distributed by Lionsgate, but both of those projects had, you know, nobody really saying no, for better or worse. But just like, I don't know, I've always been really kind of fascinated by both of them as artists who have really wanted to do things on their own terms by any means necessary. And Coppola, you know, failed at doing that. You know, I think the kind of with Lucas, it's like he got his independence, but it ruined him artistically because he can never really do anything other than Star Wars. Coppola has gone bankrupt like 10 times over and has secured his financial independence as an artist. But he did it by going outside of filmmaking and, you know, doing his winery, doing his resorts, now more recently his cannabis brand. And, you know, I'm sure he was smoking an interesting strain during the production of this movie. But, you know, I've read a lot about Coppola over the years, and Megalopolis is kind of like always in the background of like, oh yeah, like he's finally going to do it. Like, this has been kind of almost like, feels like hyped up to be kind of his like orienting compass as an artist, you know, like what all of these various experiments in studio production, live cinema, all of these things, I feel like Megalopolis was like kind of always touted as like the culmination of that. So, you know, it looms large in the Coppola myth in kind of a way that like not entirely dissimilar from like The Day the Clown Cried, you know, with Jerry Lewis, where like I feel like you kind of just assume that like you're never gonna or like Jodorowsky's Dune or something like that, where it's like the movie in your head, you know, is kind of like all that exists. And so anyways, all that just to say of like, you know, it's sort of impossible for anything to kind of live up to decades of expectations. But going into this, I feel like I was able to sort of disconnect from the Coppola myth, even though I've really enjoyed a lot of his movies and studied that myth. It's like, I don't know, I felt like Megalopolis, it's interesting that so many people are seeing it. I feel like there's been a lot of discourse around it and people taking it as this like great like defense of like artistic freedom and like, you know, auteurism, and like I don't know if it feels to me like that is just kind of people taking what they want from the movie and not necessarily representative of like what it actually is, because I think both a little bit ideologically and even kind of formally, it's like pretty conservative. You know, it's not really like imagining a new future for cinema in the same way that it's kind of the future that it imagines for society. Um, he's really just like talking around a lot of things. It's really just like talking about things. I'm not really saying a lot. You know, there's a lot of
Well, it's got
words.
to start the debate, right? What's the
Yeah.
line that you keep saying? Like the best utopia is the one that starts the debate or asks the questions or
Yeah, it's
something
like
like
it's a
that.
debate with every person on earth. And it's just like a lot of words and also a lot of allusions and references, you know, quotations of Shakespeare, but then apparently been seeing people say that like to go back to the club scene is sort of a remix of like a scene from Pygmalion. You know, every character's name is like taken from Roman history, and it just feels like a lot of words to me at the end of the day. And it sort of feels to me like one of the problems I feel like with any kind of long gestating artistic project, even I feel like things that I've written where I'm not spending like 40 years thinking about it like Coppola did with Megalopolis, but you just get like so familiar with it as the creator that you sort of, you know, very well what it's about, but you sort of forget that like everybody else needs to have like an introduction, you know, that they need to have it explained to them. And I feel like this movie, Coppola knows what it's about. Coppola knows the story, but it just kind of felt like nothing really cohered to me necessarily. Like, yeah, I don't know. What did you guys think?
I think I basically have the same sort of reaction where it, on a certain sense, it does feel a little bit deflating to see it finally. Um, and also, like you mentioned, the film style in some ways is really wild and opulent, and in other ways is like, I don't know. In that regard, it does feel like the Star Wars prequels in the sense of like, there are all these really cool illusions and uh but everything has this kind of like lifeless sheen to it,
Mm-hmm.
that's like because it's so heavily reliant on like digital effects. And at least with Star Wars, that was like a genuinely like radical use of like computers at the time. But with this movie, it kind of feels like, I don't know, it feels like visually something that could have come out 10 or 15 years ago. Um, and but I don't know, like at the same time, it's just like, because it has that kind of like no one could say no to him sort of quality, it is so singular as like an experience. Like you kind of feel like you're stuck in this alternate universe, not the alternate universe of the film, but like an alternate universe of like the way that humans talk and behave,
Yeah.
that I think is like really fascinating and honestly reminded me a lot of M. Night Shyamalan in some ways. Like the way that like some of these lines are like the Emersonian riches of my mind or whatever that was. Like the way that like Adam Driver just in the press conference just does the whole to be or not to be soliloquy, like just unprompted. Like there are things in this movie that felt like my I was like having an out of body experience because of how just there's just a lot of like stuff that I'm sure has a purpose, but it feels almost like non sequitur at times.
Yeah.
And it's not like totally like Dadaist or that sort of thing, but it has that kind of weird surreal quality of like something that's just like a few clicks off about it. And I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it does make it a little bit more notable than like uh you know, I don't know, like other kind of like weird follies throughout. Like it's not like a I can't think of a good analogy at this
Well,
point, but
like to me, like I guess this is different than how some people felt, but like I was never bored
no,
because
no, no, I was not bored at
I
all.
was I was I was engaged the entire time because yeah, I agree. Like it feels like this just kind of like alt universe of sorts, and it kept me engaged because yeah, there would be so many like scenes that you're just like, what the hell was that for? Um, honestly, a lot of the times dealing with like Shia LaBeouf and Aubrey Plaza or John
Amazing
Bolt.
duo, by the way. Like the
Oh my
best scene
god,
in the movie by far is when they're like whatever they're doing, having sex and doing political
I
I
machinations.
don't
don't
know.
know.
I can't. It doesn't hold a candle to John Voight's boner.
Second best scene in the movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say the best scene in the movie to me is John Voight going, "Do you see my boner?" And then
And then it's a bow and arrow.
And then
the
but it's like
size
a
like
mini
this
bow and
big.
arrow.
And they just stand there and get shot by the bow and arrow.
It's incredible, and like that kind of stuff. Like I feel like that kind of stuff. I'm like, this is why I'm here. Like what?
Yeah.
Because I gave up trying to be like, what is he saying? I gave up on that like 20 minutes in because I was like, I don't know what the hell's going on.
I think it's fairly straightforward what he's saying though, and I just think it's a boring thing to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Like
just
he's doing his thing that he's done in a lot of movies, and to be honest, it's not my favorite Coppola mode, which is him kind of airing his grievances about like how I'm not allowed to do what I want. Like the powers that be keep the real geniuses down. Like it's like Tucker, a Man in His Dreams, or like something like that, but just like without the
yeah.
studio framework that kind of makes those movies feel more conventional.
Yeah.
And it does have also the quality of Tucker a little bit where, that was originally intended as a musical. And this is like a very choreographed movie.
Hmm.
Everything is I think that's kind of the thing that it lives and dies on is like everything is like very much a product of his mind, there's nothing, it doesn't feel like, it's like, it doesn't feel necessarily like a collaboration with the actors. It's like they're all very much like cast in these sort of like, everything is like everything has meaning to kind of the point that like nothing does a little bit.
Mhm.
Just because I feel like everything is sort of like symbolic and like it just
Well, then sometimes it's so thuddingly symbolic. Like every time there was a title card and then Lawrence
yeah.
Fishburne reads off what's on the title card, and the title card is like New Rome
It
was
feels
in
like
squalor because people were too entertained, or it was like stuff like that.
it has the energy sometimes of like a 1990s like real-time strategy game. Like the title
Yeah,
card of
like Age of
Francis
Empires or
Ford's
something.
Megalopolis has the same energy as Sid Meier's Civilization. And then it's like you have the globe, and it's just like there's a lot of things I thought about. I feel like people have made a lot of comparisons with this movie of like Southland Tales, the Star Wars prequels. But it reminded me a lot of, I was thinking a lot about the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet
Mm.
during it, which I
Yeah.
was surprised I haven't really heard people mention that, because that also is like, modernization, but in its sort of weird alternate universe. And this is like the like inverse of like the Orson Welles modern dress production of Julius Caesar. You know what I mean? Like it's like, what if you put everybody in like the Dark Knight in like in like a Roman legionnaire's costume or something? You know, it's
But
just
it's
like,
so funny because it's really sloppy about that, because like all the cars have New York State license
yeah,
plates, for instance, that they do no attempt to like the clearly like
make Rome great again.
yeah.
Oof.
But to your point, Zach, I think the point, I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier, but I also agree that once you're kind of like in the movie, you just kind of like have to just
You,
take it as it comes.
yeah, yeah. You either decide that you're just gonna go for the ride, or you're against it. I will add the other part I really liked. Honestly, Shia LaBeouf is a part of every part of this movie that I enjoyed. The other part is when he's like doing his little rally outside, and somebody yells something, and he yells up at the sky, "Hey, you shut the fuck up!" Really, everything Shia is doing in this movie, I'm on board for. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's one of
And
those.
also the one thing though on the Shia LaBeouf note is the
Yeah.
like sort of cancel culture kind of like,
Yeah.
you know, I mean both with some of the casting, but also just like there's a very strange subplot about Adam Driver like being framed for statutory rape, which is
Yeah.
just like
The thing goes.
so
And it lasts maybe for like 5 minutes and then the
Yeah,
movie just
it
yeah,
moves
goes it
it's
on.
goes away
something.
very quickly.
No, it's something too where it's like if that was the whole plot of the movie, in some ways, like I would be more okay with it because it's like, okay, he just like has some serious axe to grind. And with this, it's just like such a little petty,
It's
like, you know, just like, oh, it's like forcing you to like, you know, to like be okay with it or
Well,
like,
and
you
it
know,
also happens in the midst of like one of the more formally ambitious parts of the movie too, where they have like this like three ring circus sort of like Ringling Brothers
Colosseum.
meets Gladiator
Yeah.
Coliseum thing going on, while also Adam Driver is getting like stoned out of his mind or something like that. And so like it's super amped up like formally. And while this is happening, you see this like fake video like where he's that's like trying to frame him for statutory rape,
Well,
and
and
then
you
he's
also
getting canceled in real time
and
while he's like
well,
losing his mind backstage.
it's the music artist who like her whole thing is that she's like this pure virgin like artist, but then yeah, she's having this sex scene.
Oh, but
She's
that's so
when
funny because she's like raising money on virginal pledges. Like people are like, I'll
yeah.
pay you $100 if you stay a virgin until marriage.
it's like when people compared it to Southland Tales, I wasn't expecting that what they meant is that it literally the movie has its own version of teen horniness is not a crime.
Yeah.
I did kind of love everything. Just a lot of the details in terms of like media parody are very funny in this movie. Like, and I genuinely enjoyed both everything with Wow Platinum,
Wow, Platinum,
Aubrey
great name.
Plaza's character, and her like financial uh, analysis show. But just also like the Vespa Sweetwater or whatever the fuck her name is, like pop star character. I love both like the just the whole kind of conceit, but particularly after she gets like outed for being like a fake virgin and she has this like Taylor Swift like reputation era, like fuck you, like not ready to make nice
Yeah.
anthem that plays, and she's like got a like bad girl makeover. And it's like this is so good. And also just like the idea of any kind of like old man trying to like engage with contemporary pop culture discourse. I just like the idea of Francis Ford Coppola, like I don't know, just I want to know his takes on pop music. You know, I want to know. I want to know if he had a brat summer.
Oh man.
um yeah, a lot, and that just kind of like just distilling down that whole sequence of events also just shows like there's so much in this like there's so much in the movie that like it like straddles this line between stupid and can't believe this is happening. That's absurd. It's like in this middle line where it's kind of stupid and I can't believe it's happening, but it's not going over the top on either side, that it's just kind of there. And like that's kind of what I feel like the mode of this entire movie is I don't really believe that this is happening and it's kind of stupid, but it's in a way that I'm like it's not really going overboard on either side. It's just kind of by the end of the movie when the John Voight boner scene happens, I was like cheering. Like I was like this is great. Like
Yeah.
I'm surprised this movie's finally ending. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't very I guess my take is ultimately like I don't think it's a very good movie, but I'm also like excited that it's out there. Like it's the sort of like
I had a hell of a time with it.
yeah, right. I had a really interesting it's like a really fascinating thing to watch while also being like weirdly simple. It's like I don't know, it feels like weirdly complicated and weirdly
It's a
simple at the same
fable.
time. Yeah, it
It's
is
a
a fable.
fable.
That's true.
That is true.
I
Yeah.
guess that's it. And I don't know, there's just so many wild choices. Like for instance, like one of the things I was talking about with Andrew Swafford because we saw it together is like he spent a good chunk of the
Good use of
movie
the full
thinking
name.
that we were supposed to be viewing the Adam Driver character with the kind of critical distance and like that it was like a send up of the Adam Driver character. And the reason he thought that is that the very first thing we see this guy do besides like learn how to stop time is he fucking blows up a like public housing
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
unit and all these people become homeless for literally the rest of the movie
Wow.
because he's trying to clear the way for Megalopolis. And so it seems at first like, is this guy a villain? Is this like a Robert Moses kind of like, and he is kind of like a Robert Moses character, but what
Yeah.
if Robert Moses was going to usher in a utopian society is kind of like the premise of this movie. And I kind of see where Andrew's coming from is that it takes a while for you to realize, oh wait, no, the movie is like sincerely on this guy's side who
Yeah.
blows up like public housing to make room for this like garden city that has no clear like public utility except to be a really nice park with
Except
moving
for
sidewalks.
unobtainium.
Unobtainium, right?
Megalon,
and
which
the and
may or
the
may not be like from the like fetuses in the womb of his dead wife or something. Yeah,
I don't know that I got that, but
I don't know. I
really?
that's
don't.
kind of
There's,
rad if that's what's happening.
I don't know. There's
The dead wife stuff
else.
was confusing.
Yeah.
It's giving me a little bit of like Manuel de Oliveira or like Raul Ruiz vibe, you know, throwing out some late style.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of like way that and I guess too a lot, you know, I feel like people have compared it to like Twin Peaks, The Return, just in like, but I feel like what those comparisons like what the similarity there is like that it is they all of those things like use modern special effects but in a way that feels like very kind of like early cinema, you know. It's just like it feels like the sort of I don't know, like Intolerance or something, you know, where it's like has this like sweep to it, but it's also like you said, I can't remember which one of you said that it's just kind of like simple, you know, it's just like and but at the same time there's a lot of plot, but the story is pretty basic. It's about urban planning.
It is about urban planning. It's also about a Soviet nuclear spaceship that crashes, which honestly is one of the more striking moments in the movie is when you
like
see the like
Cloverfield
shadows like projected up on the sides of buildings and stuff. Like
it's really cool.
That was really cool. And that's like I feel like to your point, Nadine, like that's a moment where it feels like Coppola is using like digital like composite, you know, shots to do a kind of like almost silent era looking thing. And I was expecting a little more of that, to be honest. Because you know, he's kind of famous for these kind of like formal challenges, like with the Dracula, you know, we're, you know, kind of setting the limits on the kind of effects that can be done in Dracula and that sort of thing. And then even like something like Twixt, which is kind of using, you know, digital effects to this extremely disconcerting and surreal mode. I don't know. There's just so much of this movie though that feels like you know, like a Doctor Strange effect or something like that. Something that you would see in those movies. And
Yeah.
there are those moments of like kind of striking bizarre, like kind of, oh, this is an interesting use of digital technology. For every one of that, there's just like, I don't know. I guess I just would have imagined that like the Megalopolis thing itself would be one of those striking moments, but it just
Yeah.
honestly feels like, you know,
It's not that
a
It feels like
CGI
a
city.
transitionless lenses commercial.
Yeah. It does it like it has the like the production value of like a allergy commercial or something like that. Like it's gonna be for Ozempic or something. It's great. I like that. I say that as a compliment.
Yeah,
I like that part of it.
a lot of these things I'm saying about the movie are both good and bad things about the movie. Like, I don't it's just occupying this just very strange space in my head of like all of this stuff is really entertaining because it exists, but am I laughing at it? I think that's true of definitely some of the stuff.
Oh yeah.
But also some of the stuff has to, like, the John Voight boner scene has to have been conceived as funny. Like there's no way
Yeah.
that's not supposed to be funny. Some of the other stuff, like, it has to be funny, or like, and it's just existing in this nebulous space of like it's so purely like id cinema that like
It's very
made
sincere,
yeah,
you
it's
know,
so
in both
sincere.
ways, you know.
It's so sincere that it does feel like a little like I'm making fun of the movie, but there are also like things that feel like that they're there to be made fun of. I don't know.
Yeah. And it might this might be like a based take, but like I kind of like that part that energy in the movie. I like appreciated because like you run into especially with like a lot of studio fare now. Like it's so like it just is so it feels like it's so run through like a committee of voices.
Yeah.
And it's not like this is better because it's not run through, it's just one person, which is probably also not great. But like I don't know, like I'm just like all of this stuff on the screen, it may not be great. You may not like all of it. Some of it might be hilarious, some of it might be confusing. But I'm like, at least it's something that's not just kind of this pre-packaged bullshit that we get mostly in the theaters. It's not, it's not a Beetlejuice sequel. It's not like, Iron Man 10. Like I'm just like, I don't know, like I'll like give me more of this stuff like that's just wild and kind of untamed than a lot of the tame studio fare that we're getting nowadays.
Yeah, and I think like I know that like Coppola like wants us to be like the future of cinema, or he's trying to push the form or something
Yeah.
like that. And I don't know that he does that in a conventional way, but in a strange way, like it kind of does, right? Like I mean, if every movie were like this, I think that this would not be a good example of what that is. But
Yeah.
like its existence is in and of itself like a kind of commentary on like the cinematic landscape, right? Like the fact that this is like a notable like strange like disruption in business as usual like does kind of make a kind of a point about like just where we are, as like, a cinematic culture. And like I don't know, I wish it were like better. And
Yeah.
it was a vision I could like 100% get behind, but like as a kind of like meta text of like I am angry at the studio system for having like, you know, placed me in director jail for like the past, since One from the Heart or whatever. Like it is kind of interesting that he's able to like foist this on like I mean I saw it in the West Town Mall in Knoxville. So, like that is kind of like a almost like a you know, like one of those like kind of ready-mades, that people talk about in like the 1920s or whatever, like by placing this in the context of like the art world, it makes it an interesting object of to look at. And I kind of feel the
Mhm.
same way. Like the fact that I can walk into a mall and see Megalopolis while like one screen over is Beetlejuice, like that in and of itself makes Megalopolis more interesting than the film just as a isolated thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, it feels to me just like very endemic of like contemporary cinephile culture, where it's just this like it's this sort of like ideological position. It's like I feel like a lot of the praise of this movie is not even sometimes really, not to say that there aren't people who are like genuinely, like in awe of the form of this movie or whatever, but I just feel like a lot of it is sort of just like um the artist's right to like express themselves. It's like, if you don't, it's kind of a like vote blue no matter who type thing, where it's like we have to support this, otherwise they're gonna like take all original visions away, and it doesn't really matter necessarily what the vision is as long as it's like original and like alternative.
And to be honest, like the movie itself is about that, because it very clearly it doesn't matter what Megalopolis is in the movie. It ends up being this stupid like, garden with moving sidewalks. Like the point is that Adam Driver,
it's
the
a
genius,
debate.
But it's not even a debate. Like as much as he says this is not a debate, like it's never in question whether or not Adam Driver is actually like an artist, like an artistic genius. Like it is taken as like a first principle that he is. And the conflict of the movie is all the setbacks that he has in being able to like realize his vision. And
one of the setbacks being shot in the face by a child
asking for his autograph. But like,
while his wife in the background's like, he can never say no to a child. And then he tells the child, if you can believe it, I used to be 12 years old also.
But I just think that like I think the movie itself, I mean, if it weren't such a like kind of like charming oddity in the cinematic landscape, it would be in a little bit of like an ugly vision, because it's so self-aggrandizing and it's so like aggrieved as far as like artists just can't get a fair shake. And like I'm in principle like behind that, I think like people should be able to pursue their artistic visions or whatever, but it just feels like sour grapes from Coppola, and not entirely unmerited sour grapes, but also just like, come on, man.
Given the wine.
That's true. But I mean, I don't know. It's, he got to make this movie still. And I guess maybe he would say, I'm lucky that I got to make this movie. No, a lot of other people can't. And I mean, that's a fair point, but I don't know. It's just a hard ideological pill to swallow when in the movie, the artist gets to like basically like undemocratically siphon like public dollars into this, enormous like project of dubious value. And
yeah,
I don't
know. Well, if it's still around you, check out Megalopolis. It's a hell
hold
of a
on,
time.
hold on. Did anyone here get to see the live involvement?
No. That's changing cinema right there.
I'm sure all the studio heads are rushing out to have audience plants.
It's too bad he didn't get the Amazon Alexa activation going. Like that was something he was literally like working with Amazon at one point on some
But are you joking, or is this real?
No, this is real. Like some kind, it was what the audience interaction was like replacement for. It was like, instead of having somebody talking to the Adam Driver character, it was like you were going to be able to like submit questions using Alexa or something like that. Just like very much feels like, I don't know, it feels like when you read like new media theory from like the 90s, that talks about like the information superhighway and stuff. It just feels like an old person's vision of like future technology. That's just kind of like, oh, grandpa, like go play with your Amazon, with your Alexa, your Google Echo or whatever the fuck. Like
all right. Well, Megalopolis is still in theaters if you choose to take that plunge. We're gonna take a short break, and then we're gonna be back talking about The Sixth Sense after this. And we're back with part 2 of episode 485 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be kicking off our M. Night Shyamalan series with 1999's The Sixth Sense. Written and directed by Shyamalan, the film stars Bruce Willis, Haley Joel Osment, Olivia Williams, Toni Collette, and Donnie Wahlberg, who I just added because it's kind of funny that it's Donnie Wahlberg.
Yeah, he gets pretty high billing in the opening credits.
He does. Young Cole Sear is haunted by a dark secret. He is visited by ghosts. Cole is frightened by visitations from those with unresolved problems who appear from the shadows. He is too afraid to tell anyone about his anguish except child psychologist Dr. Malcolm Crowe. As Dr. Crowe tries to uncover the truth about Cole's supernatural abilities, the consequences for client and therapist are a jolt that awakens them both to something unexplainable. David Vogel, then president of production of Walt Disney Studios, read Shyamalan's spec script and loved it. Without obtaining corporate approval, he bought the rights despite the price of $3 million and the stipulation that Shyamalan could direct the film. Disney dismissed Vogel from his position at the studio, and he left the company shortly thereafter. Disney sold the production rights to Spyglass Entertainment while retaining the distribution rights and 12.5% of the film's box office takings. Which in 1999, it was the second highest grossing film behind The Phantom Menace. So it did pretty well.
That's wild to me.
Yeah.
This movie could be titled The Phantom Menace.
That's true. During the casting process for the role of Cole Sear, Shyamalan had been apprehensive about Osment's video audition, saying later he was, quote, this really sweet cherub, kind of beautiful blonde boy. Shyamalan saw the role as darker and more brooding, but felt that Osment, quote, nailed it with the vulnerability and the need. He was able to convey a need as a human being in a way that was amazing to see.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just realized too, The Phantom Menace and The Sixth Sense are both about little boys with magical abilities.
That's true.
1999 was really on it. Well, if Haley Joel Osment wasn't going to play the role, Michael Cera auditioned for this same role.
My God.
I saw that. What a weird alternate universe we could be living in right now.
That's crazy.
And Liam Aiken was offered the role but turned it down. Marissa Tomei was considered for the role of Lynn Sear that eventually went to Toni Collette. The color red is absent from most of the film, but it is used prominently in a few isolated shots for, quote, anything in the real world that has been tainted by the other world. And, quote, to connotate really explosively emotional moments and situations. Examples include the door of the church where Cole seeks sanctuary, the balloon carpet in Cole's sweater at the birthday party, the tent in which he first encounters Kyra, the volume numbers on Crow's tape recorder, the doorknob on the locked basement door where Malcolm's office is located, the shirt that Anna wears at the restaurant, Kyra's mother's dress at the wake, and the shawl wrapped around the sleeping Anna. All the clothes Malcolm wears are items he wore or touched the evening before his death, including his overcoat, his black rowing sweatshirt, and the different layers of his suit. Though the filmmakers were careful about clues of Malcolm's true state, the camera zooms slowly toward his face when Cole says, I see dead people. The filmmakers initially feared this would be too much of a giveaway, but left it in. Reflecting on the movie in 2024, Haley Joel Osment said, Bruce Willis kept in touch following the release. Quote, I heard from Bruce a lot after it came out in those subsequent years. He'd leave voicemails at the house from time to time, just checking in. He would just call out of the blue. So sometimes it was in the lead up before travel. We went to Japan together twice, if I remember correctly, to open Sixth Sense in different cities. So he would call ahead of that. And then sometimes I would just come home from school and the answering machine would be blinking. And it'd be like, it'd be him going like, hey, Haley Joel, just saying hi.
Imagine going to school after this movie.
Right? And then coming home and Bruce Willis is like, hey, what's up? What are you doing?
Yeah, really.
New York Times in 1999 said, for Mr. Shyamalan, The Sixth Sense is a slight improvement over last year's Wide Awake.
Slight? That is a slight.
Wow.
But that isn't saying much. That insufferably coy drama of another wee Philadelphian searching for proof of God's existence barely registered at the box office. The Willis name should ensure that The Sixth Sense stays around a little bit longer.
Who was that again?
That was New York Times. Stephen Holden.
Stephen Holden.
Wow.
My God.
Yeah. Roger Ebert in 1999 said, "The Sixth Sense isn't a thriller in the modern sense, but more of a ghost story of the sort that flourished years ago when ordinary people glimpsed hidden dimensions. It has long been believed that children are better than adults at seeing ghosts. The barriers of skepticism and disbelief are not yet in place." The film was written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan, whose previous film, Wide Awake, was also about a little boy with a supernatural touch. He mourned his dead grandfather and demanded an explanation from God. I didn't think that one worked. The Sixth Sense has a kind of calm, sneaky self confidence that allows it to take us down a strange path intriguingly.
It's wild how many people are talking about Wide Awake, and it's like nobody has seen that movie. You know, it's like the Sixth Sense has been like retconned as Shyamalan's debut, kind of. You know,
I watched Wide Awake for the first time like a month ago, maybe, or something like that. That movie blows. Like it's not
no
good.
Stuart Little.
It's no Stuart Little, which I guess he was writing the screenplay for Stuart Little while he was making Wide Awake or something like that.
Oh, really?
Interesting beginning of that guy's career.
Hell of a time. Yeah, Sixth Sense. When was the last time that y'all had seen this? I remember watching this in like middle or high school, so this was kind of like a full. I just kind of treated it like a first time watch, to be honest. This time,
I think I was about the same, except I watched it a lot. Like whenever it was that I was watching it. So like, I don't know. I was actually talking with someone about this the other day about how like when you used to rent things from Blockbuster, usually you watched it like 3 or 4 times before you returned it, because it was like, at least in my family, like you'd watch it, but then maybe someone else in the family hadn't seen it, so you'd watch it again with that person, and maybe you liked it and you'd watch it. So I haven't seen it since probably like high school or middle school, but when I saw it like 3 or 4 times, and so actually I was surprised at how much of this movie I remembered. And other parts I had forgotten. Like you texted me last night when you were watching it, Zach, about how you had forgotten that Toni Collette was in this movie, and I had too. Which I think the reason for that is I just didn't know who Toni Collette was when I was watching it.
Yeah,
but
and she looks, and she's so much younger, and she has like a wig and doesn't. I mean, the first time I kind of like recognized Toni Collette was in Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah, that's probably the earliest one that I would be able to name too.
Yeah. But yeah, what was it like watching it for the first time in so long?
So I did remember the twist, unlike you, Zach. But
forgot it briefly.
Like honestly, I think one of the things I remember it being a little bit scary to me. Like I didn't watch a lot of horror movies growing up or something like that, and so like The Sixth Sense was one of the first like movies that was even in like the ballpark of horror that I watched. And I remember it being scary, and it was not particularly scary rewatching it. But one thing that was replaced by was like I found it very moving. Like I don't remember as a child being like emotionally moved. I remember being scared and like thinking the movie was cool because of the twists and all that sort of stuff. I just thought it was like unbelievably like poignant and sad by the end. And really a lot of it throughout, like all this stuff where they're like Cole is having trouble like adjusting to life, you know, because he's like plagued by these visions of ghosts and no one understands what's happening with him and the kids are cruel to him. And like the way that, I mean, knowing the twist, the way that you understand that like Bruce Willis is also having a hard time because he can't cope with the fact that like his family is, or his wife, whatever, his widow is moving on from him. Like, and that's kind of like his central like anxiety is the ways that he's can't connect with her anymore because she's starting to like see another guy and like, you know, all this sort of stuff. Like he's kind of having the opposite trajectory where like Cole can't find connection and is like struggling with that, and Bruce Willis's character had connection that he's lost and is trying to be at peace with that. And when it all kind of like fits together at the end, it's just like I just found it beautiful. I like teared up, which was not a reaction I had as a, you know, whatever, 13 or 14 watching this.
Yeah. Nadine, what about you?
Yeah, it's like a very, I think that's the thing about Shyamalan is that at the end of the day, like his movies are melodramas, more than I think horror or thriller, more than like any other kind of genre form. It's like he is really interested in the character relationships, and I think too like family dynamics, and I also forget that Toni Collette is in this movie. But just kind of rewatching it, like I also sort of forget just like how much that the mother-son relationship is a big part of the movie, and like just like the concern and anxiety that like she has for him. Um, and I feel like it's, a very, for the supernatural bent of it, it's like a very real movie in a lot of ways. I think just in terms of like um the sort of like depiction of like, I mean, it's not really like a mental illness per se that Cole is like dealing with, but I feel like it is very like a very feels like a very real um kind of true to life experience in some ways of like what it is like to be a child wrestling with trauma or fear, or just like, something that like you are scared to sort of share with the world. And it's so strange to consider like another child actor being in the movie, because I feel like so much of that and so much of the like of why it works is like literally like in Haley Joel Osment's like face and eyes, that you can just feel like how afraid he is. And he does like very little sometimes with his face, but it's just like that kind of stillness is really affecting. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this movie too, sort of like viewing it retrospectively, and in sort of like how Shyamalan sort of became known after this, what sort of people see as his like ticks or traits as a filmmaker. It's like very quiet and very like has this just like kind of realism to it. I feel like that's people always sort of knock Shyamalan for this kind of like artificiality, for his characters sort of like being in their own, just in the way that the like he writes dialogue and stuff, it's very much like you can tell that it is like his voice, but this just feels like so much more of this kind of like realist um
Yeah, it's really
drama, like
naturalist.
yeah, and it's just though it is kind of like rewatching it for me, I can't, I don't know, I unfortunately did not forget the twist. And it's just sort of rewatching it, it's just kind of funny because it feels like very obvious, when you're going into it, at least when you're going into it with just the sort of like the knowledge of like, okay, he's dead. It's just like visually like so clear, that he is just kind of separated from everything else, like when he comes into like Cole's house for the first time, it just kind of that scene opens with like him and his and Cole's mother like sitting there just like silently not saying anything to each other, and there's just um so many like visual clues. So it's just kind of interesting that it's like it does have that very like Shyamalan tendency to just be like very storyboarded and scripted and like thought out, but it doesn't really like overwhelm it in the way that like, I mean, I like later Shyamalan, but I think that's kind of like people, sort of that's always the kind of the critique is like the artificiality. So it's kind of like interesting that it's just like I feel like it threads a line of like um when you are going into it without the knowledge of the twist, I feel like it plays more into that realism, but then sort of rewatching it with that in mind, you can kind of like see how like engineered it all is.
Yeah, because watching it this time, like I was specifically being like, okay, I'm gonna watch this as if the twist knowledge was there from the beginning, right? Like, so what if this movie had started with us actually just seeing him die in the rest of the movie? And like when you view it from that way, there's a lot of really bizarre, like artificial stuff that if you don't know the twist, just seems to be part of like how people would normally act. But when you do, it's like, why would that person do that? Like, for instance, um, the scene when Bruce Willis comes in and it appears to be that he's late for this anniversary dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and the his wife is sitting there and he's like spending this whole time like monologuing about like, sorry I was late, blah blah blah, and then at the end she just walks off and goes, happy anniversary. Like, to say that out loud is really strange if you're the only person there, and is kind of like a
Yeah.
Shyamalan sort of thing. But if you don't know the twist, it's using that to feel like just she's giving him the cold shoulder.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of things like that where the kind of like cinematic language he's like cheating with because like scenes will start kind of like what you said, where he's already sitting there with Cole when like Tony Collette like comes in with him or whatever. And
Well, he's sitting there with Tony Collette.
so sorry, yeah, other way around. He's sitting there with Tony Collette when Cole comes in, and that's a really strange place to begin that scene, unless you're assuming like, you know, connecting the dots of like, oh, this is just the beginning of the scene, and so like obviously they've introduced themselves before the scene, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like once it's not, like once you're aware of that, like the way that Tony Collette and like Haley Joel Osment interact in that movie is like to your point, Nadine, like much more like Shyamalan-y, like as we would, you know, with these like kind of long, like awkward pauses and things like that, like that in the first viewing kind of come across as like, oh, there's a stranger here, and I don't know how to act. But then like on the second time through, it's just like
Mm-hmm.
just stranger human behavior. That's a good thought.
I feel like it's
Maybe.
also too, it's just like, it's really interesting because it's like a movie that is in some ways, I mean, I feel like the downside with twistiness and what people like by the time of like The Village, I think started kind of criticizing Shyamalan for is like, oh, well, like once you know the twist, then it's like the whole thing is doesn't work, or you know, it's like, you know, if you have to like go in not knowing what the twist is. But The Sixth Sense is so like made to be rewatched in a way because it's
It's so
like
clever.
that you
Yeah.
do that, you know, I feel like it's made to sort of like entice you to see it a second time because it's like you get through it that first time and you're like, wait a minute, like I have to experience it, like, you know, the reality has shifted and I need to like rewatch it to like catch all the clues. It's kind of interesting to me that like, you know, this and Fight Club both being like, you know, pivotal 1999 movies, because I feel like they're both sort of similarly like made to sort of hook you in that way where like reality is destabilized and then you have to like then you want to rewatch it to sort of like do the detective work and investigate the movie and see like if you can poke holes in it, you know, which
So,
feels just like
Well,
very much like home video era kind of like, you know, that you can,
yeah.
you know, that you would
Thank,
want to rewatch it or be able to.
yeah, thank God we didn't have cinema sins in 1999.
well, I think also like the Fight Club comparison is interesting because both of those movies kind of become their true selves once you know what the twist is, right? It's not like for instance, The Usual Suspects is another movie that people throw around as like, whoa, big twist at the end. And I don't think that movie is really, I mean, the twist is like, oh wow, I didn't see that coming, but it doesn't like open up the movie for
No.
you. It's not like the movie becomes a different thing. But like both The Sixth Sense and Fight Club, it changes the scope of what the movie is about to like once you understand like the knowledge at the end of the movie in parts. And like I think that it's been so long since I saw Fight Club, but at least in The Sixth Sense, like when I was rewatching it, I feel like the movie is much richer. Like once you realize like that Bruce Willis has an arc that's not a troubled work-life balance.
Yeah, it makes it very sad in a way,
Yeah.
like, because it's not just like, oh, marriage problems. It's like you really feel that once you know to look visually for the distance, you like really feel it. And I feel like also there's just a lot of the strangeness of like, um, it just sort of like, you know, magnifies all those kind of like the fact that like they're never in a like actual office or actual like clinical environment. There's
Yeah.
just something about that and something about that kind of, I don't know, it just like you, I guess you're just sort of like thinking of him as a ghost from the jump, and sort of I feel like they just like imbues it with a lot more just like of that kind of, you know, not scary but like haunting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Well, and
that's
it's also like the kind of like insight that he gives to Cole about like maybe the ghosts are just looking for help or whatever, and that turns them into no longer scary. Um, Kind of works for the movie as well, like because like once you realize that like this isn't just a story about like scary ghosts traumatizing this kid, like what it becomes is like these ghosts are like kind of trapped in like this perpetual state of grief for what they've lost like in the real world, and like are desperately trying to like reach out and like resolve something about like their lives that they weren't able to like. I mean the big sequence at the end where like they go and like oust the mother for having like poisoned the daughter, um is in some ways just like, oh wow, you know, you can use your powers for good, Cole. But also like that's so sad. Like you're sitting there dead as a ghost, knowing that like your mother killed you, and you just desperately need someone to recognize that you were killed instead of simply she died of a disease or you know whatever they seem to be
She's
thinking
also
like.
Marissa Cooper from the OC.
who killed Misha Barton.
Yeah.
We were talking before about Bruce Willis, and I wanted to talk a little bit about him in this movie. Because really the movie doesn't get made without Bruce Willis. It was one of those where he attached his name to it, and kind of had like at that period in time, like had that star power where he could kind of he was the M Night has talked about it, but it was like kind of the was in between M Night and like the studio heads, as they made this, that you know M Night could make the movie that he wanted to. And this is such an interesting it's I feel like maybe y'all disagree. I feel like the movie itself is pretty iconic, but I don't know if it's necessarily maybe a iconic Bruce Willis role, because it's not this is very like reserved, inward, like it's not John McClane. This is a very different, like softer Bruce Willis, who still like has like that, I think just naturally has that physicality, because he just has that kind of action star body. But in this, it's not. He doesn't use it for anything. It's more just he's this much softer, gentler character. So what do y'all make of his? What are y'all thoughts on his performance in this movie?
I mean, I feel like the really iconic Bruce Willis Shyamalan pairing is Unbreakable, which kind of does utilize some of that physicality
Mm-hmm.
to an interesting degree. I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, when I think of Bruce Willis movies, it's like Die Hard, and I mean, this is like probably in like the first 5 movies of his that I think about. And I mean, maybe it's just because it is a great movie that he was in, but like, there's something about like how he carries himself in this movie that's he's kind of like on edge the whole time, like he seems. um and I don't know, like in a like a different actor might have approached that differently, but like it being Bruce Willis because he's like this big guy and like has a kind of like rough like affect, like it makes some of the like the therapy sessions or like connections that he makes with Cole, it gives a different interesting texture to them because of I don't know, like I was thinking like watching this movie because my wife is has a background in like social work and stuff like that, and has done like counseling. And some of the things that he like, just the ways that he acts and like the things he says in the therapy sessions, I'm like, well, this is the award-winning like star child psychologist of Philadelphia, like who gets a recognition from the mayor. Like, I don't know, I don't want to question his methods, but there's like that scene when he like talks about like the struggles he's having at home, like with his wife or whatever, Nicole, and like stuff like that is just kind of odd, and it like places some of those scenes like with this like tension that's, I don't know, like maybe that's not Bruce Willis doing it, but like that's what I associate with him with this movie is like almost like this kind of, I don't know, like rougher attitude in the therapy sessions than I would have anticipated for a child psychologist. I don't know. I think it's interesting the energy he brings.
It's also interesting that he, like Toni Collette, I think, was nominated for an Oscar. Haley Joel Osment was nominated for an Oscar, but Bruce Willis wasn't. And you're kind of like, Bruce Willis is a lot of this movie.
He is, but I feel like too he's kind of a gateway, this sort of like a vessel, and I feel like there is I think it's the double-edged sword of like playing a ghost. I feel like he is trying to kind of in certain moments channel this kind of like sort of empty affect, and I feel like you can also just too kind of like as an actor, I feel like you can feel him like restraining himself, like trying to be quieter. I think that like it's really funny. I was just thinking of another 1999 Bruce Willis movie. I don't know if y'all have seen Breakfast of Champions by Alan Rudolph, which is just like the total other direction. I mean, it's a Vonnegut adaptation, and it's just like really absurd satire, and he is just like hammy to another level in that movie and really over the top. And I feel like that's kind of so much of his like even like in something like Die Hard, it's like, yeah, John McClane is like a more realistic action hero than Schwarzenegger or Van Damme or whoever, but he's still like very quippy and very like doing a lot. And I feel like this movie you can really feel him kind of just trying to like mellow out. But I feel like because of that, it doesn't really feel like I feel like he lets the other actors like do the acting, but I also too, this is just an aside, like watching it this time, I just cannot stop noticing just like how obviously he's like wearing a hairpiece. It just feels like very apparent to me. Maybe it's just me just like seeing him, bald so much and like everything, but it just feels just like very much just like
that's what they give you in the afterlife. It's like, hey, let's restore your hair. I do think though, like, because like what you said, because of him being a ghost, he doesn't have scenes where he's playing off of people that much. Like, so I mean, probably the reason why like Toni Collette,
there is a lot of like muttering to himself.
Well, and like, I mean, the scene that probably is like the single like carrying the most weight in terms of like Haley Joel Osment and Toni Collette getting the Oscar is the scene, their last scene together in the car, where they're playing off of each other in this really kind of like, I mean, obviously it's like a good scene for like the Academy, for your consideration reel, but also like there's a lot of like chemistry between those two performances in that scene that is played out across the canvas of those two actors. And Bruce Willis doesn't really get that. I mean, the closest he gets is when he's like talking to his sleeping wife at the end. And I just by design, that's not going to be that dynamic as the car scene because there's only one active agent in that.
Yeah.
I will say
it's true.
the opening dialogue where Bruce Willis is talking like Dr. Seuss, that is just like the most like, even though I was saying that it's like, oh, it's like not really what people consider like Shyamalan-y. That is like so Shyamalan.
It's
Just it's
so
just like
Shyamalan.
it's just the strangest detail. And like before she says you sound like Dr. Seuss when you're drunk, it's just like, why is he talking like this?
I do think like it is, having now seen the direction of Shyamalan's career, and I also like a lot of later Shyamalan, like it's interesting and makes a lot of sense that this was the movie that really broke through with audiences because in a lot of ways it is a lot more conventional than like The Village or Old or something like that. But at the same time, like it's interesting like what people latched on about Shyamalan from this movie that have proven to be like complete red herrings. You know, like I honestly think the twist thing has been a red herring in
Yeah.
the grand scope of Shyamalan's career, even though he kind of like made a name for himself on that. Like I think the um there were the Spielberg comparisons with him early on, which I think have proven to be truly the wrong way to be thinking about Shyamalan as like this kind of like populist, like four quadrant, like, making, thoughtful, well-made movies for everybody sort of thing. Like, but those are the things that people immediately latched onto with Shyamalan. And I think probably contributed to like what made people like really dislike The Village so much, which is probably like the first movie where like Shyamalan in retrospect, like comes of age as an artist, like in terms of like making movies that like we would recognize as Shyamalan-esque now. But like people truly like rejected that movie in some quadrants at the time. And this movie is so interesting because you can see those fingerprints of Shyamalan there, but they weren't the things that I think people latched onto about the movie.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is like so much, and I think what he sort of found again in going smaller and sort of like shrinking the scope of his work again, is that it's really about like how he works with actors, I think, and about like the relationships, and just like as I feel like the scope of his work grew, I think both like he's just like, I think it was probably like the Spielberg comparisons in some sense that put him kind of on that trajectory to like being a big budget filmmaker when it's like that, again, it's like this is a very directed movie, very storyboarded, so I can see why the studio system would kind of push him in that way, but that's not, it's like it's almost more like uh theater or something, just in terms of like I feel like The Sixth Sense you could make a like stage production of like relatively easily because it's just kind of like confined spaces and about the sort of the drama between the characters, which is kind of like from The Visit on, like that's sort of what he's gone back to, of like it's more more patently like genre work, more horror, explicitly horror than like The Sixth Sense was. But I think he's kind of like stripped himself down, and I think it's really like Spielberg, there's like that visual imagination, but Shyamalan is like really a writer at the end of the day. I feel like that is sort of what his bread and butter is. Like he is a very visually gifted filmmaker, but at the end of the day, I feel like um it is really about like how it is written.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Any other final thoughts on Sixth Sense before we wrap up?
I gotta say before I rewatch this, I think Sixth Sense is kind of like the cliche, like everybody's favorite Shyamalan, and I was approaching this having a lot of fondness for his more recent stuff, like Knock at the Cabin or Old, or Cinematary's #1 movie of 2021, Old. And thinking that, like, you know what, I think I prefer the kind of weirder and more like overtly like idiosyncratic Shyamalan. But like, damn, like watching this movie, I was like, fuck, man, this movie's so good. Like, this might actually be my favorite Shyamalan movie.
Dang. Pulling you back in.
I know. Like, I watched The Sixth Sense and Signs in particular, like those two movies, like a lot. Like, and those are kind of formative, like early movies where I was like, I'm watching an adult movie kind of movie, for me. And I haven't really returned to either of them that much, like I mentioned earlier. And I think, at least with The Sixth Sense, what's making it me think like it's one of my favorite is that the way that it's, like I was talking about at the beginning, that it opened up to me, like, and it's not just a clever movie, but it's like a really meaningful and moving movie. And I think that, like, maybe some of his later movies, despite being more idiosyncratic, are kind of, I don't want to say they're worse, but the idiosyncrasies are like the things that are endearing. Like, I don't know, maybe there's like a meta element where I'm like interested in Shyamalan as like an auteur, whereas watching The Sixth Sense, like, I'm keyed into just The Sixth Sense as a film and a narrative in a way that's not true of his later movies. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that this is not to say that like the performances aren't great in other Shyamalan movies, but I feel like that's sort of the difference of like you come away from The Sixth Sense not just thinking about his vision. I feel like it just feels like, I think that's what gives it a sense of realness, is just like the characters are very like felt and feel like they're given a lot of life, and reality by the performers. Whereas everybody in like later period Shyamalan is still kind of like, you're still kind of aware that they're like speaking Shyamalan's words,
Yeah.
It's not going for the kind of like verisimilitude that The Sixth Sense is, where it's like these are pretty believable relationships. It's just like in kind of its own universe, and there are touches of that here. But I feel like it's also too, I feel like very much has just kind of like the vibe of like a spec script, of something where it's just like, this is like something you can pitch, get it down to the log line, and that's what it is. Of just like, this, you can kind of feel him like shopping this around for years as his calling card, because it is just like a nuts and bolts kind of story and concept. Whereas I feel like the later works, it's like dependent on his, of like the Shyamalan name a little bit more. It leads with that. It's not like, this is your introduction to Shyamalan. It's like Shyamalan is sort of the hook a little bit more. I guess that's just what auteur theory is, but like, yeah.
No, I think that's true, and I think that's kind of what's really interesting me about this series as we kick it off, is because we've been so ingrained the last few years with like Old and Knock at the Cabin and Trap and these movies, and kind of have I think like we've gone through, at least for me, like a reassessment of M. Night Shyamalan in a different appreciation. It's going to be interesting to watch, especially like this one and then The Village, and just kind of like bring our modern sensibilities about him to those and see if anything changes. Because like, to me, I'm like, yeah, this movie was fantastic.
I guess what it is like, you can really feel, I think that this is a movie that like, you can feel like why they wouldn't have wanted him to direct it a little bit, because it just is a movie that like, I mean, it is an M. Night Shyamalan movie, but I could see it so easily being kind of like interpreted by somebody else. It would work within the filmography of like a Robert Zemeckis or somebody. It's like you could very easily imagine their take on it. And it has the kind of the more those kind of touches of dialogue, like I was saying with the Dr. Seuss thing, they're much more like restrained, and it just gets to a point very quickly with his movies where it's like nobody else. I mean, I feel like from The Village on, nobody else could have directed that. Like Signs, I can kind of imagine. Again, it just sort of like the family drama kind of. I could see somebody else directing it, but it's just like it becomes fully Shyamalan top to bottom, like, after this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that like his, I guess, kind of consensus worst movies like Last Airbender or an After Earth and stuff are movies that also feel kind of anonymous in terms of like his style. Like, I mean, like people, like, people will say that like, oh, The Happening is terrible, but like the people like to watch The Happening. It is distinctive and interesting because of the ways that M. Night Shyamalan approaches it. Whereas like no one's out here like having parties where they rewatch like The Last Airbender or After Earth.
I'm kind of an After Earth apologist. It's like
never
it's
mind.
like
I retract my statement then.
it's like if Pitch a Pong made a blockbuster, low key.
Well, I think
kind of
a
exaggerating,
Pitchapong
but,
is he's a Shyamalan fan, right? Isn't he on record?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Shyamalan is using his cinematographer now. He used him for Trap.
Oh right, yeah.
Nice. That's very sweet. Like I hope that they've met up and they're friends.
Shyamalan
Like,
also beloved by the French. Sight and sound has been very high on his movies over the years, and including the ones that, well, largely the ones that people haven't been kind to. But
you got to have that French backing.
Yeah, like Jerry Lewis.
All right. All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. If you want to find us, we're on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary. You can also find us on letterboxd.com/cinematary, where we list the movies we talked about in this episode, all 2 of them. But if you'd like to support the show, patreon.com/cinematary. We want to thank our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marsathi, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for supporting the show. We talked about The Village, but that's going to be our next episode. We'll be back taking that journey and seeing if we're, at least for me, the reassessment of Shyamalan continues. But until then, thanks for listening. We'll see you in that episode.